Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description. The Boy with Hacky by Donald Grimm. What if Luffy discovered his hacky at a young age, like when Shanks was around? Watch as a stronger, smarter Luffy emerges to take the Grand Line by storm with the power of the King's disposition. I don't own anything, adios.
There was a reason the gods had made Luffy dumb. Hell, they could have made the entire D-line dumb just to make sure Luffy was dumb. Because Luffy was never meant to be smart enough to merit him teaching someone. The fates had decreed it. So were the thoughts of the three mere mortals stuck on the crew of a glutinous, naive demigod, who was secretly the craziest man on the planet. When he had said that he was going to teach the crew how to discover and harness their hacky, they had naturally assumed that it would involve clear, concise instructions, with meditation and gentle encouragement, the whole 9 yards. Hacky, after all, was energy of the spirit. How foolish they were to hope for such deluded fantasies. Let us take a moment of silence to mourn the loss of three people's optimism and will to live. Okay, that was pushing it, but Usopp, Nami, and Zoro were just about ready to commit seppuku in order to escape the insanity that Luffy called lessons. Almost as soon as Syrup Village was out of sight, the young man had started to randomly emit large waves of hacky at his crewmates. When asked, he replied that, "You guys need to get used to my hacky when I start having to fight for real. Besides, this should make finding your hacky faster." Apart from the total lack of evidence to support the last statement, the three were shocked at the first one. Fighting for real? What was that little episode with the Black Cat crew?
The brutally honest boy man had responded, "So far, you guys have seen me use small amounts with total control, or flying off the handle.
You haven't seen me use massive amounts with actual finesse yet." While small parts of their minds were simply amazed Luffy had used the word finesse correctly in a sentence, the greater part of the crew's minds were stunned into silence. The guy made a point. They hadn't seen control and power at the same time. The ensuing nightmares of an even stronger Luffy had plagued them for a week. Though the crew might have been able to function whilst simultaneously piloting their first ship, Usopp had graciously painted their flag and sail for them. And dealing with constant mental battering rams, Luffy had other plans. Even as he lazed around on his special seat, played with Thrasher, and sent the occasional psychic tsunami at his nakama, he was ordering them with vague and inexact advice on how to access their hacky. When he saw how saying, "Just think about what your dream really hard and let it out," wasn't making any progress, Luffy had taken to sneaking up on the crew while they worked and making fake attempts on their lives. Seriously, he'd yell out, "Hey," and then sent a Gomu Gomu pistol about an inch to the left of their head. He varied up the attacks and methods constantly, so that the crew wouldn't become used to a routine. While being interrogated, beaten within an inch of death by the irate crew members, he'd simply replied, completely unaware of his swollen lips, "The first thing people think of when they're about to die is what they really want before they lose it forever. Eventually, you guys are going to accidentally tap your hacky, and then we'll work from there." Though his crew was considering mutiny more and more seriously the longer he kept it up, they persevered. Partially so that they could actually get their hacky and make it all end, but mostly so that they could override Luffy's hacky with their own and finally make their punishments actually stick. It's a lot harder to just blow off an attempt on your life because you did something wrong when you don't have the certainty that you can just make them faint if it gets serious. As the days rolled by and the crew adjusted to life on the Going Merry, the three normal crew members, though they'd never admit that it was Luffy's psychotic method that helped, entered the mysterious ranks of those that could use hacky.
Zoro was the first to really get it down, having tapped his hacky in his fight and already having a general idea of what it felt.
For him, he thought of his promise to Kuina and the song of his blades radiating within his soul like a tuning fork, which gave off waves of hacky instead of sound. For Nami, she pictured sitting in Belmir's cottage with her world map on the wall next to Arlong's stuffed head, and simply channeled the warm, fuzzy feeling. Usopp merely imagined a parade in honor of the brave warrior, Captain Usopp, building up inside him until it exploded out into the open air. The crew was surprised that once they actually found their hacky, using it was much easier than they anticipated. Zoro, with Usopp right behind him, had learned how to channel his hacky into his swords, making his strikes stronger, heavier, and smoother. The fact that he spent every second that he wasn't sleeping or eating training like a maniac helped. He was really determined to not only catch up with Luffy, but fly above and beyond. Usopp wasn't nearly as motivated, though he did practice his marksmanship in his free moments. Being spiritually assaulted by Luffy had, if not entirely curing, at least curbed his instinct to run and hide from any enemy of significant power. If he was going to be revered across the world, he had to actually fight occasionally after all. His lying was still going full blast, though. Nami, surprisingly, had discovered a power that not even Luffy had known about. By saturating the air with hacky, barely noticeable to the unaware, she was able to predict her enemies' moves almost before they made them. Though Zoro or Luffy could take her down in less than a second if they tried, she at least managed to become quite adept at dodging and finding openings. Plus, a hacky-powered slap with a shot of feminine fury could have felled better men than Luffy or Zoro. In short, Luffy had nearly doubled the strength of his crew with their introduction to hacky. It had only cost his crew most of their sanity and his personal safety. Trifles, really. There was also the fact that if an outsider found themselves on their boat, they would wind up unconscious within an hour. Luffy's burst of hacky, which he hadn't let up on yet, were now answered by collaborative attacks from Zoro, Nami, and Usopp. Anyone caught in the crossfire that wasn't at least as strong as a marine captain was doomed. It was about 2 weeks after they had gotten Usopp on the crew that this theory was put to the test. Zoro was taking a power nap after doing 2,000 handstand push-ups after 1,000 swings with both hands in his mouth. Usopp was dabbling with his mad scientist experiments. Nami was reading the latest newspaper, and Luffy was trying to test out the cannon. Pretty soon, Usopp intervened, his duty as a marksman forbidding him from letting Luffy's atrocious aiming continue. On a whim, Usopp let a small trickle of his own hacky, not as strong as Zoro's and nowhere near as potent as Luffy's special variety, but still the equivalent of a psychic steroid. Taking careful aim, Usopp fired at a far-off outcropping of rocks. To his immense surprise, the entire spire that he'd been aiming at crumbled into pebbles, taking down 2 of its brothers with it. Everyone conscious blinked in surprise, before Luffy yelled, "Suge!" at the top of his lungs, and Nami resolved to be a bit nicer to Usopp from now on. Shortly afterward, the crew took a break from their activities to have lunch, Zoro waking of his own accord. As they enjoyed the simple meal, well, as much as they could enjoy it while fending off Luffy's constant attempts to steal from their plates, and discussing the need to get an actual cook on the crew, a loud yell came from outside. "Come out, you bastards, I'm going to make you pay for trying to kill bro." The crew blinked, before Luffy came out to see what the problem was. A dark-skinned man with a tattoo on his cheek, in his 20s, stood on deck, clad in purple clothes and opaque shades, while he wielded a sword with moderate skill in his right hand. He seemed pissed for some odd reason, though Luffy couldn't imagine why, though his mental abilities weren't the most impressive, so maybe he should get a sedent. The man caught sight of Luffy. He jumped right at him, waving his sword wildly and screaming, "Filthy pirate! I'll kill you for what you've done." Luffy easily dodged, but was just as easily angered when he saw how the mystery man had sliced up the railing. "I don't know who the hell you are, but don't harm the ship," Luffy yelled, grabbing the man's head and throwing him across the ship, hypocritically damaging the ship as he did. Inside the cabin, Zoro perked an ear. He knew that voice. Just as the man was picking himself back up for a second pass, Zoro spoke out from the railing. "Johnny, what are you doing here? Is Yosaku with you?" The man looked up in surprise, recognizing the voice of his former bounty hunter, and nearly choking when he saw that he was actually there. Big Bro, the heartless pirate hunter, on a pirate ship. Impossible. And yet, Johnny's eyes kept stubbornly sending the message to his brain until the man was forced to accept that he was actually there. "Big Bro, what are you doing here?" Then, before Zoro could even answer, the man broke into tears and cried, "Big Bro, it's terrible. Yosaku is terribly ill. We were resting at that outcropping, when out of nowhere we were attacked. I rowed over here for revenge, and Yosaku is probably dying as we speak. Big Bro, what do we do?" Zoro's eyes widened. Usopp, who had emerged with Nami, looked a tad guilty, and Luffy was tilting his head to the side. So, this guy had thought that they'd killed his nakama. That's why he was attacking them. Luffy instantly let the guy off the hook. Zoro, with minimal help from the near-hysterical Johnny, hauled up the sick man from the raft attached to the side of the ship.
One look would tell even the most moronic of idiots, Luffy sneezes, that the man was ill. His skin was gray and clammy, and his eyes showed only whites. While Usopp, Luffy, and Johnny were panicking, Nami bent down to take a closer look, Zoro watching curiously. She stood up and yelled at Usopp and Luffy to get the limes they had in storage. 2 weeks ago, they would have complained and she'd have been forced to use her patented demonic glare of death. Now, she just punctuated her words with a mild burst of hacky. Johnny stiffened like a board, while Luffy and Usopp just realized she was serious and went to do her bidding. Almost like a dog whistle, Thrasher showed up as well, back from his light hunting trip. Johnny nearly went into apoplexy when he saw the massive seeking, but Nami merely turned and yelled, "Make yourself useful, you lazy fish. Keep this guy in the shade with your head." By now fully convinced that Nami was a seeking mother in disguise, as was sometimes done, Thrasher did as he was told, keeping pace with the ship in order to keep Yosaku in the shade of his giant head. Nami spoke to Johnny, trying to break him out of his shock. "Don't worry about him, he's our captain's pet. You should be more worried about your friend. He's got scurvy. It's a disease that has claimed more pirates and sailors than anything else combined over the years. A day or two more without treatment, and he would have died." Johnny broke into fresh wailing at the news, while her 2 minions arrived with the precious citrus. Nami instructed them to feed the limes to Yosaku.
Normally, Johnny would have protested, but this chick was just plain scary, what with ordering around seekings and using mysterious energies. As Luffy and Usopp started to stupidly squeeze as many limes into the man's mouth as physically possible, Nami returned to Johnny. You can stop crying, you know. Scurvy is merely caused by a lack of vitamin C, commonly found in citrus fruits. Before, ships didn't have a way to properly store fruit, but we've progressed from that time. Provided he takes it easy, your friend should be healthy again in a few days. Johnny made the transition from crying in sorrow to yelling at Nami in joy almost instantly. As Nami was wiping spittle off her face, Luffy remarked how Nami was really smart for knowing this. That caused a tick mark to appear. You idiot, this is the kind of trouble that appears when you commit yourself to a life on the sea. How could you have just blindly set out without thinking about all the dangers ahead?
Almost as soon as the words were out of Nami's mouth, she remembered who she was talking to. You didn't, did you? Great, it's bad enough knowing your captain's an idiot, now other people do too. Nami sank into her little dark cloud as she pictured people laughing at her as she crossed the street, recognizing her from Johnny's stories of the orange-head pirate who works for an idiot. Small insects died when they entered her atmosphere of gloom.
The man in question seemed to recover shortly afterward, only to choke on the limes. Almost before they were out of his mouth, he was up in arms with Johnny, doing an odd little dance and practically screaming their joy that he hadn't died. The mood, as well as Nami's, was broken when the man fell over, once again looking ill. No one heals that fast, Baka, she screamed, her fangs appearing. When the irate woman managed to coordinate Yosaku into the men's quarters, the crew had a meeting in the cabin with Johnny. Said bounty hunter was extremely grateful, and was eager to help them in any way to make up for it.
Well, Usopp began the practical one under all his layers of cowardice. Would you happen to know where we could find a cook that can fight with sea legs? We need someone that can make a feast out of scraps, before Luffy starves us by eating all the stores in the middle of the night. All crew members sans the one mentioned glared and let out small waves of hacky, silently making Johnny weak at the knees. Their captain paid no attention to either the jibe or the hacky.
Recovering slightly, and realizing that there was something odd about the pirate crew his big bro had for some reason joined, Johnny recalled a tidbit of information he had heard. Well, I might know just the place. Bear in mind, it's really close to the Grand Line, so there's a lot of strong ruffians showing up. That man you've been looking for was even seen in the area, big bro. Zoro's response to this was to clutch one of his 3 blades while a wolfish smile of anticipation emerged from his features. The others seemed interested. Always one for the melodramatic, Johnny took a pose and pointed out towards the ocean. Go, make a heading for north-northeast to the fighting restaurant, Barati. The trip to Barati was uneventful, if you didn't count how many times Johnny and Yosaku passed out. The crew's near subconscious use of hacky to deal with each other, make a point, or just get attention to make an announcement had led to many interesting situations.
While Luffy had already learned to not use his hacky at every opportunity, since his was much more powerful and damaging, the crew had yet to learn this lesson. Secretly, Luffy was glad had taken to learning hacky so quickly. Maybe he should teach people stuff more often. Oddly, an incredibly sudden and powerful thunderstorm appeared after he made the thought. Still, the crew had started to tone it down by the time they came within sight of the restaurant. They couldn't just have the locals falling unconscious because of them, could they? Best to save the psychic war for the privacy of their own ship. The ship, as was eagerly pointed out by Luffy, looked like a giant fish. It had taken the combined intervention of the crew to stop Thrasher from pouncing. The Seeking was then told, very sternly, to guard the ship but to stay under the water. Thrasher grumbled something back at Luffy, who'd replied, "Ah, come on boy. It's only as long as we're around people. I promise to play with you more, but can you please just hide?" Some more grumbling, but the sulking serpent eventually submerged a comfortable distance beneath the ship. Just as Thrasher disappeared, a marine ship showed up out of nowhere. The apparent leader of the ship called out to them. His hair was the same shade as Kobe's, though his skin was much darker, and he wore a fancy suit. His knuckles elded to brass knuckles made of iron, and a pretty woman in a red dress hung off his arm. He spoke with the lofty confidence of someone who arrogantly thinks he's invincible without the brawn to back it up. "Who are you people? That's not a pirate insignia I'm familiar with." He spoke courteously enough, but the inhabitants of the ship, most notably Usopp, Johnny, and Yosaku, noticed how many cannons were pointed ominously at them. The man then didn't even wait for an answer, instead turning his back to them. Never mind, Iron Fist, full body doesn't bother with every bunch of rabble that comes along. As he walked away, the man showed his men a closed fist with the thumb pointing downward. Zoro rushed forward, about to cut the guys aiming a cannon at the ship, when Luffy yelled, "I'll handle it." With that, Luffy let out a targeted burst of hacky at the Marines readying the cannon. He didn't want to actually hurt them, since they might not be the total jerks their leader was. The men collapsed, one of them inadvertently adjusting the cannon so that it was pointing at the roof of the restaurant. A loud boom sounded,
before a portion of the top deck of the fish boat was blown off. Luffy rubbed the back of his head at his mistake, while the remaining Marines quietly made themselves scarce. Mess with the unheard of pirate that knocked out their guys without touching them? No, thank you very much. Nami, as was her role, exploded at Luffy's latest idiocy. Baka, why didn't you just reflect the cannonball like you did with Buggy? Now the guys at the restaurant are going to blame us, since they'll never blame the Marines. If you think I'm paying to fix that, you've got another thing coming. Luffy shrugged. He wasn't one to worry, and believed that everything was going to work out in the end. As the crew was docking at the small quay, someone emerged from the restaurant. His chef's hat was almost as tall as himself, his right leg was a wooden peg, and his mustache was comprised of two, nearly horizontal blonde braids. His eyes seemed to practically scream, "Mess with me and you die," which was impressive in a chubby, middle-aged cook. He turned to face the approaching crew, his eyes narrowed in irritation. "Which one of you brats is responsible for the hole in my roof?" With this question, he revealed that he was both the owner of the restaurant and appropriately pissed. Just as Nami and Usopp tried to think up an answer that wouldn't get them killed, Luffy answered with his usual thoughtless honesty. "That's my fault. I'm very sorry about that." He bowed as he apologized, giving the chef the perfect opportunity to knock the kid on the back of his head with a powerful kick. The crew was surprised that the man had enough strength to knock someone like Luffy around, while lovable idiot in question seemed to finally notice the peg leg. Did you lose your leg because of me?" The man stomped on Luffy's back, effectively cutting off the boy's airways. "Idiot, I lost this leg years ago. However, that explosion gave me a nasty shock, and I'm getting on in years. To cover all the medical expenses and repairs, you're going to work it off here for a year." The man grinned, certain that he'd just secured a waiter that couldn't quit. Boy was he wrong. Almost in unison, the crew stepped forward, drawing the man's gaze. They responded by letting out small bursts of hacky. The man raised an eyebrow, but reacted in no other way, proving that he was indeed strong. Then, Luffy joined in. "I'm sorry about your roof, really, but I can't afford to work here for a year." Luffy's hacky joined the simmering waves his nakama were sending. The man, surprising them all, responded by kicking Luffy full in the face, sending him into the arms of his crew. "I'm surprised that a bunch of kids like you can use hacky, but don't think that excuses you from working here. You're going to work here, whether you like it or not." With that, the man turned and re-entered the restaurant. Luffy stared after him, before saying, "If that Osan could stand up to that, even if we weren't trying to hurt him, then he's not someone to mess with." Usopp exclaimed, "But Luffy, you can't actually stay here for a year." Luffy looked back at his marksman, and grinned in such a way to send shivers up everyone's spines except Zoro's, who was merely pitying the poor, unfortunate souls that had just been saddled with his captain. "Don't worry. I'm going to be so horrible at whatever job they give me that they'll be begging me to leave by the end of the week. In the meantime, you guys try to convince one of the cooks to join us." With that, Luffy entered the restaurant, followed swiftly by his crew, as well as Johnny and Yosaku. The place was really high class, with marble and candles and soft music in the background. Almost immediately after entering, the man from before grabbed Luffy by the collar and dragging the oddly compliant boy away. Just as the crew started looking for a table, figuring they'd eat while they were there, another blonde showed up out of nowhere. This one was around their own age, maybe a year older. His bangs covered his left eye, and his face was otherwise unremarkable. He wore a black suit over a blue shirt, with shiny shoes and creased pants. In one hand, he held a rose, which he proffered to Nami as he got down on one knee. "Thank you, O goddess of the sea, for arranging this meeting today, for I have met the most beautiful gem you have ever yielded upon a mere man. My love, you are as radiant as the sun. Allow me to adore you as you enjoy the meal I shall lovingly cook for you." At this point, Hearts had replaced his visible eye, and his legs were doing some odd wiggling thing. The men of the group were a tad overwhelmed at this display of adoration, though Nami seemed to take it in her stride. "Who said that being beautiful didn't get you anywhere?" The man led them to a large table, where he proceeded to give Nami a rare vintage and weight on her hand and foot, completely ignoring the men. A few minutes, a truly magnificent feast was set out in front of them. Luffy, wearing a white apron, had been the one to deliver it, so there was a bite missing from nearly every dish, as would have been expected. The blonde apparently noticed, and did something that shocked everyone who knew Luffy. He kicked him hard enough to leave a mark. As the crew knew from long, gleeful experience, it took enough manpower to crush stone to get even a light bruise to appear on Luffy's rubber skin. This guy was not just a good cook, but apparently a strong one. Nami cupped the man's cheek, turning him into an obedient ball of love once again. My, you must be strong to leave a mark on my captain there," she said seductively, indicating the slightly steaming form of Luffy, who was picking himself up off the ground. "The food's delicious as well. Might I have the pleasure of knowing your name?" The man responded, his mouth in a weird pout, "My beloved angel, you care to know the name of a lowly cur such as myself? Your beauty is only matched by your kindness." At this remark, the men of the crew couldn't contain a scoff. earning them each a brief death glare from the cook. My name, my most lustrous pearl, is Sanji, the assistant head chef. How I long to shake off the shackles of my position to sail the world with such a flower as yourself. Sadly, there is a great obstacle in our path, an obstacle that might never be breached. From behind him, the owner spoke up, where he'd been the whole time. So, I'm an obstacle, am I? Lil, eggplant? Sanji's face morphed into a grimace, before standing up and facing the man. What is it, old man? He asked, only to be bonked on the head by the older man's hat. That's owner Zeph to you, you punk. So, you want to go off after some random woman. Far be it from me to stop you. You're always getting into fights. You flirt with any moderately attractive woman, and your cooking sucks. That last one, more than anything, seemed to rile up Sanji, whose hands clenched into fists. Before the blonde could respond, Nami sent a glare at the alone. I was just about to snag him as our crew's chef. As she said this, she let loose a tad of hacky, to show her frustration, causing the poor couple behind the man to faint. The man regarded her, and grimaced. I have no problem with you taking this annoying lil eggplant off my hands, but could you please refrain from harming my customers? Before Nami could snap back at the patronizing tone, or Sanji could beat the man up for talking to a woman so rudely, the doors were flung open. Everyone turned to see the new arrival. He was thin, almost unhealthily so, and there were bags under his eyes. He wore a jacket with a serpent design on the back over a dark green shirt and pants, all of them dirty and tattered. He looked like he'd been through hell and emerged out the other end. In one hand, he held a pistol. Silence reigned over the restaurant. The man walked over to an empty table, and sat down in a chair, his feet on the table. He spoke, his voice a dry rasp. I don't care what it is. Just get me something to eat. An uneasy murmuring broke out among the patrons of the establishment, anxious about the aura of danger around the man. The Straw Hats realized that he must have been a prisoner on the marine ship. If so, Thrasher should be allowed to play with them. The man was obviously starving. A large man, nearly bald, with the fakest smile known to man appeared from thin air by the man. His gigantic arms crossed in a gesture of graciousness. Welcome, mere bastard, the man said, with nothing but cheesy compliance in his voice. If the guy was a waiter, he would probably sell to Lucifer himself if he had the money. So saying, do you have any money to pay for your meal? The burly cook asked, that freaky-ass smile still on his face. The starving man aimed at the cook's head. Do you take steel? He asked, obviously used to intimidation tactics. The cook's smile turned into a sneer within nanoseconds. With no forewarning, the man swept the chair out from under the pirate. As the starving man fell to the ground, the cook whirled the chair above his head and brought it down quite heavily on the man's back. Luffy knew that there was a time and a place for recklessness, and this wasn't it. Nami had seen worse, Zoro didn't particularly care, and Usopp was terrified of the man's obvious strength, hence the lack of intervention on their part. Still, they could glare, and if looks could kill, the cook would be cozying up to Davy Jones right now. With aplomb, the cook picked up the pirate and threw him out the doors, to the applause of the customers. Zeph muttered under his breath, Patty, you continue to disappoint me, before returning to the kitchens. Sanji disappeared, and the crew was left to eat their meal, though with much less of an appetite. Luffy exited the restaurant, looking to check up on the man. To his mild surprise, Sanji was already there, laying a plate of food in front of the pirate. The man seemed shocked at the display of kindness, while Sanji merely leaned against the railing and lit a cigarette. Oi, eat it. You must be hungry. The man was starting to tear up as the aroma of the food hit his nostrils, but he turned away. This is worse than being kicked out. I won't accept pity. My pride as a man and as a pirate won't let me. Take it away. Sanji merely repeated his command, taking a puff on the sweet tobacco. The pirates will crumble, and he started to eat like a starving dog. As he ate, his tears broke free, flowing freely down his face. Delicious, delicious, it's too delicious. I've never had anything this good, he admits through his full mouth, trying to hide his tears. Sanji merely grins. Luffy sits on the railing beside Sanji. You're a pretty nice guy, to feed him even though he couldn't pay. You're pretty strong too, if you could mark me like that. I'm stuck working here for now, but the mustache Osan is going to let me go eventually. Why don't you join my crew? Sanji looks up incredulously at Luffy, who merely waits for a reply. He had made his request. He was going to wait for an answer, and then nag until the answer was yes if it was a no. Not a chance, waiter boy. That beauty of yours is amazing, but death itself couldn't drag me from this restaurant. That old fart needs me, whether he'll admit it or not. Besides, I have no interest in being a pirate. Sanji blew the smoke cloud in Luffy's face, causing the young pirate to start coughing. The starving man, now full, turns to face Luffy. You're a pirate, aren't you? Luffy, still coughing, nods his head. The man asks, with polite curiosity, where are you headed? Luffy reclaims his breath and answers, the Grand Line, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Sanji raised an eyebrow, but the man seemed to almost choke in shock. Take that back. You don't want to go there. You can't imagine the horrors in that wretched ocean. Luffy blinks, wondering what the man means by that, but he turns away from Luffy. Forget it, do what you want. I just hope you don't fear death. So saying, the man stands up and quickly procures a raft. As he prepares to leave, he turns to face Sanji. My name is Jin, of the Don Krieg Pirates. I thank you for the meal, but I must leave. Sanji merely nods, and when Zeph appears on the upper deck, doesn't react at all. He just picks up the dirty dishes and tosses them into the ocean. Jin is shocked by this display, while Luffy merely becomes that much more determined to get this cook on his crew. Sanji waves Jin off, before turning to return to his work, leaving behind the approving chef and obstinate freak of nature. 3 days had passed since the crew had arrived, and Luffy was making fair progress with both his goals. He had, to date, broken 37 plates, messed up 17 orders, set fire to the kitchen twice, and had, accidentally, broken holes in the floor thrice. Zeph was about ready to tear his mustaches out, since none of his formidable kicks seemed to greatly affect the rubber boy. Meanwhile, in collaboration with Nami, Sanji was placed under a constant barrage to recruiting attempts. His duty to Zeph and by proxy the restaurant was strong, but one could only take so much of Luffy's infamous whining. Zoro, Usopp, and Nami, in the meantime, spent their time learning how to keep their hacky under control. Having learned how to use it and gone on a binge for a little while, they were having trouble exerting the same level of self-control that Luffy did. Of course, it was that very thought that had galvanized them into action. Luffy, having more self-control than them. It was a sign of the apocalypse. During the 3-day period, Nami came across Johnny and Yosaku's stack of wanted posters, reminding her uncomfortably of her subterfuge. Thrasher was fed on scraps by Luffy, and helps to scare away the customers by appearing as an ominous shadow right beside their boats. Zeph was surprised that the kid had a pet seeking of all things, but just chalked it up to being one more thing on the list of peculiarities about this particular group of kids. Armed with hacky, obviously skilled, alongside a docile sea monster, he almost felt impressed. On the 3rd day, an unnatural fog enveloped the area, making it hard to see your hand in front of your face. Luffy was taking out the garbage as Usopp called out to him from the Going Merry. Luffy, how much longer do we have to wait here? Nami gets off free because of that arrow cook, but we've got to pay for everything. When do we get out of here? Luffy merely grinned and gave Usopp a thumbs up. That gesture alone was enough to soothe Usopp. Luffy really was an amazing guy, once you accepted that he was a hopeless idiot. As Luffy turned to re-enter the Baratie, he paused. His head turned to face the mist, his expression unreadable. Zoro seemed to tense up at the same time. Usopp and Nami looked around in confusion, wondering what had set the powerhouses of the crew on edge. Out of the mist, the shadow of an enormous galleon emerged, cloaked in shadow and the mist. Only one thing stood out. The pirate flag hung high on its mast. From within, one of the Stomers cried out, "Run for your lives. That's the flag of Don Krieg, King of East Blue. The hourglasses on the flag show that our time has come. Run, I say, ruin." Luffy was nearly thrown off the deck into the ocean as every customer fled in a mad dash to their boats, desperate to get as far away as was possible from the terror of East Blue. Within, Patty's best friend Carne could be heard yelling at the dumbstruck man. "Look what you've done. You insulted one of Krieg's pirates and now he's taking revenge." Patty, through trembling lips, managed to sputter out, "BB, but it makes no sense. Why would a man with an armada of 50 ships come all the way here for just one man?" Luffy entered the restaurant, to see every single chef in the place out and cowering. Sanji appeared, taking a drag from his latest cig. "That ship's awfully damaged, wouldn't you say?" he asked, making everyone in hearing distance pause. The mist cleared a bit and Sanji's statement proved true. The ship seemed as if a gigantic beast had torn at the ship with its massive claws. Everyone who knew of Krieg's reputation gaped. What could do this to the most feared man in East Blue, the master of subterfuge and betrayal, Don Krieg? Luffy waited by the sidelines, waiting for what was going to happen. Sanji and Zeph were in similar modes of calm, while the rest of the staff started muttering in fear among themselves, with Patty the object of more than a few glares. Slowly, heavy footsteps could be heard outside the doors. They were opened, to reveal an interesting sight. A giant of a man, wearing beach clothes alongside clashing gloves and a thick cape, was leaning on Jin, looking as if he wasn't fully there. The giant, evidently Don Krieg, collapsed to the floor, Jin following him, looking like a puppy when he finds his master sick and injured. The man spoke into the floor. Please give me food. I don't care if it's scraps. I have lots of money, I beg of you. I can't remember the last time I ate something." The cooks were shocked at the sight of such a fearsome pirate begging for food, while Sanji silently made his way to the kitchen. Patty walked forward, all his arrogant bluster returned. "Feed you? Don't make me laugh, someone call the Marines."
They'll never get another chance like this. Jin looks up, his eyes broadcasting so much disgust and loathing that the potted plants in the room wilt a little. "You bastard. We've got money this time. Doesn't that make us customers?" Patty, ever the hypocrite, went into a prepared speech about how pirates don't count, and that scum didn't deserve the scraps from the garbage can. He would have continued, but Sanji kindly imploded his face for him.
Patty crumbled like a house of cards, while Sanji strode forward and placed a huge bowl of fried rice and a bottle of wine in front of Krieg, who began to eat with just as much eagerness as Jin had a few days before. Carne yelled out, "Sanji, what the hell are you doing? Don't you know who that is? If you feed him, he's going to take over the ship or something. This guy has no remorse. How could you just give food to a heartless pirate?" Sanji didn't get a chance to answer, as he was suddenly socked right in the face by the now energized Krieg, who was roaring in triumph. Jin looked shocked, as if he hadn't expected Krieg to bite the hand that fed him. Krieg took his gloves off, revealing his diamond knuckles. "That food's as good as my subordinate said it was." The man pointed to his ship. "There are about 100 men still alive on my ship. Give me the food, and I'll give you a chance to escape before I steal this here boat of yours." Jin looked horrified. "Done. That's not what you promised," he yelled, only to be cowed into submission by one glare from Krieg. Krieg turned to face the cooks, his face showing the mad fox beneath. "I like this ship of yours. It's the perfect disguise. With this, I'll be able to pull off much more ambushes. Now start cooking those meals if you want to live." The cooks protested loudly, proclaiming their pride as fighters. Sanji, however, merely got up and made his way to the stairs to the kitchen. Carne asked, "Oi, Sanji. Where are you going?" Sanji replied tonelessly, "To the kitchens, of course. We've got 100 meals to cook, after all." Everyone froze, unable to believe Sanji's apparent betrayal, though oddly enough, Luffy understood why he did it almost easily. That's the benefit of being an idiot. Things that should be complex seem awfully simple. As the cooks pulled out giant utensils out of nowhere, brandishing them threateningly, Sanji merely spread his arms. He said, "We are cooks of the sea. It doesn't matter if they're a devil or a saint. If a man appears before us with a rumbling tummy, it is our duty to make sure he is fed. Isn't that enough for a chef?" The wise remark would have worked on any man with a shred of compassion, but Patty had always had a deficit in that area. He knocked Sanji down with one blow to the head. "Sanji, I know that you feed the people I throw out, and maybe that's the right thing sometimes. But you can't just feed a bunch of pirates. This is Barati. We've dealt with plenty of pirates in our time." He turns to face Krieg, pulling large cannon from a secret compartment. "So, you like the meal, did you? Well, why don't you stick around for dessert, meatball of doom?" Patty pulled the trigger, unleashing sound and destruction. A giant dust cloud obscured the door. Luffy wasn't fooled. In his experience, the arrogant fools always stuck around like cockroaches. Patty wasn't as wise, and started to make a victory speech. Then, Krieg spoke, causing the celebrating cooks to nearly piss themselves. "Is that what you call dessert? It tastes terrible." The cloud dispersed, revealing an unharmed Krieg, who was ripping off his beach shirt to reveal the thick, gold armor underneath. "With this woot steel armor, the greatest weapons, and the most men, I'm invincible. I am the only pirate worthy of the title Don. Now pay for your insolence." Krieg pulled out twin pistols, while cannons emerged from his armor. Barely giving his targets the time to widen their eyes, Krieg opened fire. Several cooks went down with wounds, though most of them weren't fatal. Luffy, Sanji, and a few others remained completely unhurt, either due to blind luck or circumstances of fate. Krieg was practically foaming at the mouth, yelling about how he was the unquestionable greatest, not noticing what was approaching until it was right in front of him. Zeph dropped a giant sack in front of Krieg, saying, "Here's food for 100, go feed your men." Luffy raised an eyebrow, while the staff of the Baratin nearly had strokes. Their own owner, giving into this maniac. Krieg, instead of being thankful, seemed like he had seen a ghost. "You," he whispered, almost as if he were talking to himself. "You're Red-Leg Zeph, aren't you? The fearsome pirate captain that was also the ship's cook. The man that was called Red-Leg because his shoes were stained with the blood of his enemies." Around this point, Krieg regained his composure. "Seems that those days are over." Zeph shrugged. "I've chosen the life of a cook. I'm through with piracy." Krieg laughed and yelled at Zeph that he hadn't chosen. Losing his leg had chosen for him. Luffy and Sanji glared at that. Sanji for the man disrespecting the man that had saved his life. Luffy just because the man had assumed Zeph couldn't fight with only one leg. That was a bold-faced lie. The man could cook better than Sanji on a bad day. Krieg got a sick grin on his face. "You survived a year in the Grand Line. You must have kept a journal of your journey. Give it to me. I need it. Armed with your knowledge, I shall conquer the Grand Line." Zeph turned his back on Krieg. "It is true I have the log, but I won't give it to someone to you. It's the pride of my crew." "Why would you even need it? Mister couldn't last a week in the Grand Line." Fearful muttering. "Not even Don Krieg could have handled the Grand Line." Krieg grimaced. "That was a fluke. I had the men. The only thing I lacked was knowledge. I was arrogant and believed I could take on that monstrous sea without strategy. However, your log must explain what method you used to survive there." Give it to me. I needed to become the Pirate King. Luffy frowned. Say what now? He stepped forward, speaking for the first time since this whole thing started. I don't know who you are, but the man who's going to be the Pirate King is me. Luffy punctuated his statement with a steady flow of hacky. That was the thing about Hawashoku. With normal hacky, it was one quick burst, the only variable the size and strength. With the king's disposition, Luffy was capable of releasing a continuous stream. Fitting, since a king needed a certain aura to intimidate his unruly subjects. Krieg seemed vastly uncomfortable with the hacky, while Jin was choking on his spit, but he managed to cover it up with his usual bluster. You, the Pirate King? I'll ignore that comment, kid, cause the man who'll be the Pirate King is definitely me. Current score. Luffy 1, Krieg 1. Zoro spoke up from the stairs. Yo, Luffy, you need our help with this guy? Everyone turned their attention to him, only to find a bloodthirsty warrior, eager for the fight to come, but keeping himself calm in the meantime. Beside him stood the slightly trembling Usopp, though the man had his slingshot out, so that was a good sign. We can take on any guy you want, Luffy. No one can stand up to the invincible Usopp. Luffy 2, Krieg 1. Krieg decided to back off and focus on the immediate problem. I don't have time to deal with you kids. The man picked up the sack, turning to leave, but not without some parting words. I'm going to feed my men. Anyone still around when I get back is as good as dead. I'll be expecting that log. With that, the crook left, going to feed his lackeys, leaving Jin behind to the tender mercies of Barati. Such a lucky guy, right? Jin was practically prostrate. I am so sorry for all of this. This isn't what he said he'd do. He was supposed to just take the food and leave you in peace. Zeph didn't seem particularly fazed by this. He turned to his cooks and said, if any one of you doesn't have the courage to stay and fight, I will certainly not hold it against you. His men were stunned, but didn't even need to think. This was their home, the place that hadn't taken them in when they were drifting alone. They would show Krieg the power of the Baraties fighting cooks.
Jin watched with something very near approaching horror. He screamed at them how they were throwing their lives away, that the dawn was unbeatable. Sanji silenced him. Jin, it is my duty as a cook to ensure all men are fed. However, he said, flipping a nearby table upright with one movement of his leg. Now that they're fed, I have no obligation to them. If anyone so much as breathes wrong at this restaurant, I'll kill them. Sanji glared to get his point across. Jin gulped.
The man seemed to close in, muttering to himself, it's the damn ocean's fault. Luffy perked up, remembering a few crucial details he'd missed. Oi, Jin, you've been to the Grand Line, right? What's it like? Ah, Luffy. Always capable of childlike excitement at any moment of danger. Jin looked at him with hollow eyes. Do yourself a favor. Abandon that dream of yours. You have your whole life ahead of you. You shouldn't throw it away in that place. Jin was curled up into a ball by now. An armada of 50 ships and 5,000 men, all taken down by storms and a single man. Everyone was shocked at that. One man? Jin continued. I thought it was a nightmare. All my mates, thousands of men strong, obliterated within minutes. All by that beast, that man. The man with the eyes of a hawk. Zoro tensed at that. His hand unconsciously went to his sword. Zeph spoke up at this point, saying, if what you say is true, those eyes practically confirm it. That was Jurikeel Mahawk. The literal world's greatest when it comes to swordsmanship. Maybe you guys interrupted his nap. Stuff like that happens in the Grand Line. Killing people over little things. Before anyone could comment further, an almighty splitting sound filled the air, as if the world's largest plank of wood had been snapped in half. A few went to the windows, but most went outside, to come across the most unbelievable sight they'd ever witnessed. Don Krieg's ship had been sliced in half. There was no other word for it. It was cut down the middle as if whatever deity was out there had dropped a guillotine over the ship. However, the Straw Hat crew noticed something much more personal concerning them. The Going Merry was gone. Big bro, Johnny yelled, dragging Yosaku on board while Zeph barked quick commands to ensure they wouldn't sink. Big bro, it was horrible. We were just standing around when Big Sis hit us with that hockey thing you told us about. The next thing we know, she's sailing away in the ship. She's stolen your ship, the crew simultaneously yelled out, Nani. While Zoro started to mutter darkly how he'd never trusted the woman, and Usopp freaked out about Kaya's ship being stolen from them. Luffy seemed oddly calm. Oi, big bro Luffy. Why do you seem so uncaring? Johnny screamed. Because Thrasher isn't here. The crew were surprised, but discovered that the shadow that had marked Thrasher had disappeared. He wouldn't be scared off by whatever happened to that ship. So, he must have gone with Nami. That means that Thrasher believes that whatever Nami is doing, she's doing it for a very good reason. Zoro muttered darkly how the fish could just be following her in fear. Luffy stubbornly shook his head. Thrasher trusts her, and I trust Thrasher. I want you to go after her, but don't assume anything. Give her a chance to explain. Zoro and Usopp were reminded why the captain was Luffy. Obediently, they started to prepare Johnny and Yosaku's raft. Zoro quickly stopped, however, when he caught sight of an approaching boat. It was small, shaped like a coffin, with lit candles at each vertex, oddly green in color. It was the man sitting in the boat that caused Zoro to freeze. An intoxicating mixture of anticipation, battle lust, and awe raced through his veins as he laid eyes on the man he'd set off to sea for in the first place. The man wore a trench coat, black outside, red inside, over his bare chest and simple pants. His face was shaded by a feathered hat, but his yellow eyes seemed to pierce right through the darkness. Like floodlights in the night, on his back, the biggest sword anyone had seen hung in a harness, the steel black as midnight, the crossguard as long as an arm and dripping with jewels. "That's him, that's Mihawk," Zoro muttered to himself, alerting those that heard him of who the man was. One of Krieg's men, revitalized by Zeph's food, yelled out, "You bastard, why did you chase after us? Why did you hunt us down all the way back here?" Mihawk regarded the random pirate, before replying in a dry tone, "For fun. I was bored." The pirate sputtered at the reason, unable to believe that this demon in human's flesh had taken down the entirety of Krieg's fleet for such a stupid reason. Enraged, he aimed a pistol at the man's head and fired. Only a few caught what happened in that instant. Mihawk, with effortless grace, drew his sword and, in a lightning-quick movement that looked easy when he did it, deflected the bullets with the tip of his sword. The pirate glanced down at his gun, wondering what had happened, as his aim had been true. Zoro appeared behind the pirate, eager for a fight. "I've never seen such style with a blade. To be able to deflect bullets is admirable." Mihawk turned his gaze to Zoro, who did not so much as flinch as the infamous eyes regarded him. But of course, without subtlety and grace, a sword is naught but an iron bar. The man spoke offhand, as if he did this every day. Hell, he probably did. Zoro gripped his swords, drawing the attention of Krieg's men, who started whispering fearfully when they saw the infamous pirate hunter Zoro was in their midst. "I set out to sea to face you one day, and clay now, as a swordsman." Mihawk regarded him icily. "Pitiful weakling. You might have some skill in this sea, but remember that it is the weakest of the five. You fail to understand how large the world is. Why should I waste my time with you?" Zoro drew his swords, getting into his Santoryu, his eyes blazing with determination, not a drop of fear anywhere in his stance. Mihawk chuckles to himself. In an instant, Mihawk was on the same platform broken from Krieg's ship as Zoro. "As you wish. I will end your life for you." Zoro glared, only to become furious when, instead of drawing his sword, Mihawk revealed a small knife hidden in a necklace he wore. Mihawk grinned. "Unfortunately, this is the smallest blade I own." Zoro charged, yelling out, "Don't take me lightly, Onigiri." Zoro let loose with his trademark attack. All his strength and every drop of haki he could muster behind the blow, he would show this man how wrong he was. Mihawk merely darted forward with his knife, completely immobilizing Zoro. Everyone stared in shock. Zoro's unstoppable Onigiri halted by a toy knife. Johnny and Yosaku cried out it must be a trick. Luffy watched on, aware of how important this fight was to Zoro. Zoro himself was dumbfounded. "There's no way I'm this far away," he cried out, staring unbelievably at the point where all three of his swords were stuck fast by one puny knife. Mihawk, on the other hand, seemed loftily confident, if a little curious about something, probably the haki. Then, it happened. Mihawk's arm bent. It was barely an inch, but it proved that Zoro's attack had gotten through, it only barely. That was all Zoro needed. If he could knock him back an inch, he could knock him back another. In a blinding flurry, Zoro pulled away before unleashing a frenzy of his best attacks, all his dreams, ambitions, training, and the gift of his captain, haki, coming out in an unquenchable tide. Mihawk blocked each attack with simple, efficient movements, but his eyes showed disbelief. Such ferocious swordplay. And the boy uses haki. What makes him fight so fearlessly? Zoro was gone. In his place was a raving beast, a monster that would never stop, even in the face of death, until it got what it wanted. He cared not for the fact that all his assaults were blocked. He just continued on with another. It was an awe-inspiring sight. The unstoppable force of Zoro's Santoryu, meeting the immovable object of Mihawk's skill. The chefs and pirates watched and felt wonder. They had never seen a fight like this. Johnny, Yosaku, and Usopp cheered on, while Luffy just looked on, pride in his eyes as he watched his first mate. Sanji was amazed that the Marimo kept going on relentlessly, even when it was obvious he wasn't going to win. Zeph's expression was unreadable. Finally, Zoro overextended. He pulled back for another attack, leaving an opening. Mihawk exploited it, darting forward like Quicksilver, embedding the knife in Zoro's chest. Johnny and Yosaku had to be restrained by Luffy, before a quick flare of haki left them limp in his arms. Luffy glared at their barely conscious bodies. It was Zoro's fight, by God, and no one was going to interfere. Mihawk looked into Zoro's eyes, which held a resignation that the man had never seen before. "Why do you not pull back?" the master asked. Zoro responded, I don't honestly know. I just feel that if I step back, even once, then all the promises, deals, and many other things till now, all of it will be meaningless. Mihawk replied, yes, and that's called defeat. If you don't retreat, you'll die. Zoro glared right into the man's eyes, something few had ever done. Death would be better, Zoro spat, the hacky leaving his exhausted body without conscious effort as he spoke. Mihawk withdrew the knife, putting it away. Boy, tell me your name. Zoro got into his final stance, preparing himself for one last attack. Roronoa Zoro. Mihawk grinned. I'll take care to remember that. As an honor from one swordsman to another, my black sword, the greatest in the world, shall take your life. So saying, Mihawk drew the massive blade, holding it was all the grace and power of a mighty dragon. In that same context, Zoro was a phoenix, fighting ferociously for what it believed in, never accepting death, coming back time and time again, stronger than ever. Zoro started to spin the swords in his hand. Santoryu Ugi. Sanzen Sakai. Zoro yelled as Mihawk dashed forward, condensing everything that he believed in, what he fought for, the core of his being, into a single attack, the very power of his soul and will overflowing into his blades. The attacks clashed in an invisible instant. Mihawk was now behind Zoro. Zoro retained his stance from his attack, the world holding its breath as it and the people watching awaited the outcome. The swords in Zoro's hands shattered, and numerous cuts appeared across his body. Unseen by anyone, hidden by his hat, a small scratch mars Mihawk's cheek. The man grins. He has found a true swordsman. Zoro calmly sheathed his Kuina's sword, the Wado Ichimonji, before turning and baring his chest to Mihawk. He looks up, no fear or hesitation in his eyes. A blow to the back is a swordsman's shame, was all he said, looking into the calm, approving eyes of Mihawk. Very true, the man responds, before bringing his blade down in a slice that cut Zoro's chest wide open. Came the universal cry from the Straw Hat crew. Johnny and Yosaku dived in the water, desperate to save their big bro. Sanji, who had watched incredulously, yelled, Baka. It's simple, to abandon your dream. No one hears him over Luffy's anger. I'll kill you, Luffy yells, haki pouring off of him in waves, making many of the chefs and pirates fall over, unconscious and foaming at the mouth, even though they were at the very fringes. Luffy leaps forward, his fist flying forward at Mihawk, stunned into stillness by the shock of Luffy's spirit. Usopp is not idle. A courage he has never known wells up from within, and suddenly he has his slingshot lined up with Mihawk, and his is stuffing the lead ball in his grip with every ounce of haki he can muster. Zeph and Mihawk unknowingly think the same thing, to react so when they see their crewmate injured this badly. Mihawk barely dodges Luffy's punch, the man sailing by him to impact with a wooden wall, which he plows through like it isn't there, his hand coming back to latch onto the platform before he drowns. Usopp fired, causing the floor beneath Mihawk to crumble into dust, unbalancing the man. Luffy flies forward like a shot from a pistol, this time making contact with his fist, sending Mihawk flying. All his skill rendered useless against Luffy's rage. Mihawk crashes down on a piece of Krieg's boat that had already managed to float that far. He has traversed the entire length of the restaurant by the force of a single man's fist. Usopp lines up his aim again, as Luffy prepare another blow. Their only thought, this guy's going to pay. Usopp had grown close to Zoro, seeing him as a kind of lazy, scary cousin that he was forced to live with. They didn't get along well, but Usopp's first instinct was to avenge him, so it must have counted for something. Luffy needed no such reason. Zoro was his nakama. This man had hurt Zoro. It was as simple as that. Mihawk spoke up, feeling impressed for the first time in what felt like forever. You are a good crew, to attack so fiercely for you crewmate. But you need not avenge him, he is not dead. Usopp and Luffy pause, turning to look at Zoro, only to find that he is indeed alive, dragged to the raft by Johnny and Yosaku. As they watch, Zoro shakily unsheathes his one remaining sword. Never again, they hear. Zoro's voice faint but full of emotion. Unashamed tears fall from Zoro's eyes as he proclaims for the world to hear. Until I face you again. I will never lose. I will not lose again until I face you once more. I'm going to become the world's greatest. Got a problem with that, Captain? Luffy shook his head. I wouldn't expect anything less. A smile adorns Luffy's face, now that his rage has evaporated at say. Mihawk speaks up, drawing the attention of everyone. Roronoa Zoro, train harder, harder than you ever have, surpass your limits, surpass me. Zeph whispers to himself, only Sanji hearing him. For Hawkeye Mihawk to say such words. This crew is destined for greatness. Mihawk regards Luffy as Usopp, his former cowardice emerging, ducks down and busies himself with preparing the raft to chase Nami. You, boy, what is your ambition? Luffy looks back, in even greater determination that Zoro's burning from within his soul. Pirate King, Mihawk chuckles. That is a hard road, harder even than the one your young friend has chosen. You have earned my respect. I pray we meet again. With that, Mihawk jumps to his boat. Of course, some idiot which shall remain unnamed. Hint. He has purple hair and is obviously as obsessed with weapons as Tenten from Naruto. Oi, Hawkeyes, didn't you come here for my head, the head of the fearsome Don Krieg? Shoot, he named himself. There goes the suspense. Mihawk regarded the man with his piercing, dead gaze, which had now returned. I might have come here for that, but I've had more than my fill of excitement for today. I think I shall return to my home and nap. Krieg yells out in rage, not even caring as the few conscious members of his crew beg him to stop. As he opened fire on Mihawk, the swordsman could be heard hearing, "A true fool." There was an explosion of sound and water, and suddenly Mihawk had disappeared, as if he'd never been. Luffy's arm came out of the blast, stunning the few still conscious who didn't know about his powers. As Luffy got back on the Baratie, Usopp yelled out to him as he, the injured Zoro, and the two bounty hunters took off. "Luffy, we're off to get Nami. Be sure to bring that cook with you when we meet up." Luffy grins and gives the thumbs up. "Oi, Osan, if I take down Krieg for you, can I leave this place?" Zeph regarded the grinning rubber man before looking down at the prostrate forms of his staff. "Doesn't look like I have much choice, do I? Do what you want." Luffy grinned, the strongest of Baratie, Zeph, Sanji, a few anonymous cooks, and oddly Patty and Carne, behind him as he turned his gaze on Krieg, with his guns and crew. "With pleasure." Luffy gazed around. The sea. How he loved the sea. It was both the one thing that could hurt him and the one thing he could never part from. God, it was just so beautiful. Full of possibilities too. Adventures just like his are completely different, yet they all happened on the sea. Such was the workings of Luffy's mind as he lazed about, waiting for lunch. The fight with Krieg hadn't been long. Hell, it was a joke. Sanji took on the freaky shield guy, but Luffy had taken on everyone else, without breaking a sweat. One pulse of hacky and what remained of the lackeys were down. Krieg had of course pulled every trick he had out, but it didn't really work out. Bullets didn't pierce, he completely ignored the spikes with his massive pain tolerance, and that poison bomb he'd prepared near the end had been stopped before it started. That spear had been a pain, but Luffy had countered with an odd power of hacky. He could delay or redirect explosions. He wasn't really good at it, and wound up with a few burns, but he managed to take it down. Of course, there was the net. As Krieg was collapsing under Luffy's unforgiving fists, he'd flamethrower-ed the rubber boy and thrown an iron net out of nowhere, sending Luffy into the sea. As Luffy started drowning, he'd been saved by two people, one to be expected, and one quite the surprise. The first one was now cooking. The second sat across from Yosaku. Maybe we should get the timeline straight first. Sanji had been reminded of his childhood dream upon hearing Luffy's own impossible dream, and witnessing the stubbornness and conviction with which he chased it down, defying death itself. In the aftermath of the fight, thoughts of all blue had plagued him. Zeph, wanting him to chase his dream, had pulled a trick in order to make him leave of his own accord. Sanji had seen through it eventually, but he'd realized what he'd truly wanted. While Sanji listened in as the staff explained their ruse in claiming Sanji's food was terrible in order to make him quit, Yosaku had appeared in a most unusual fashion. Still, how many people can claim they'd traveled in a shark's mouth, seriously? When the resulting mayhem had died down, Yosaku explained how the group that had left had managed to determine where Nami was headed. Luffy was all for leaving immediately, heedless of Yosaku's warnings that the person on the island made Krieg look harmless. With the thanks, and 80% of the meat, of Baratie, Luffy and company had made to leave, only to be stopped by Sanji. His words were still clear in Luffy's head. "We all have foolish dreams. I guess I'll have a go at mine. I'll join your crew." And thus, the odd, intangible, mind-boggling power of Luffy strikes once again. He could make people that hated his guts become his best friend, given enough time. Why, oh why, had fate given the charisma to the idiot? Why? Luffy had jumped for joy, immediately thinking of all the delicious food he was going to eat. Sanji, in a goodbye that had started out stoic but had dissolved into everyone crying, left the Baratie to chase down his dream of all blue as a pirate. This is what people are expecting. Let's throw the curveball, shall we? While Luffy had made the preparations to go, Jin had approached him. The Krieg crew, the ones that had recovered from the Mihawk incident, had fled with their tails between their legs, leaving him behind. Jin was in a state of great confusion. He'd always believed that Krieg was the greatest, and had dutifully followed him even while he committed atrocious acts, because of his respect for the man's strength. The Don was the best. To be the best, some things just had to be done. That illusion had been shattered. Krieg had crossed a line. It was one thing to use a marine ship to sneak up on a base. It was another to betray the very people that had saved your life. Jin had seen the amazing strength that Luffy had demonstrated. The single-minded focus and drive that allowed him to take on the invincible. Like a puppy, Jin had attached himself to Luffy the same way he'd attached himself to Krieg. Luffy had seen that Jin was a good guy, and he demonstrated his skill at the cannonball tonfa, as he called them, when Patty had snuck up on him to get him to pay for his free meal a few days prior. He was welcomed into the crew, no questions asked. What? Don't look at me like that. The guy's going to want an animate skeleton on his crew 10 minutes after meeting him. Mild terror in the fourth dimension aside, Luffy was ecstatic. He'd gotten the world's greatest cook, and well, whatever Jin was to boot. It had only been a day since they'd left the Baratie, but Luffy's charm had already started working. Jin was proving to be excellent company. Sanji, especially, seemed to be making friends with him, the two of them finding that, aside from Sanji's womanizing, the two had much in common. Still, he seemed withdrawn at times, as if the reality of Krieg's defeat were still catching up to him. Luffy needed to break him out of his shell. Well, no time like the present, Luffy guessed. Oi, Jin. I was wondering, what's your life like? Sanji already told us all about All Blue and Zeph saving him back at the Baratie, so I know him. You, on the other hand, I don't know at all. You're still part of my crew, but we're not Nakama till we've cried. Mind telling me your story? It was true. Luffy had, through hacky treatments, whining, and a lot of dodging, gotten Zoro and Usopp to admit their pasts, making them all closer as Nakama. Nami, though, had seemed ashamed and very sad when the subject came up, and even Luffy could be sensitive. Jin looked willing enough, though his eyes reflected some old sorrow. He began with, I was born on a small island, on the other end of East Blue, near the Red Line. Time were hard. Our village was right by the Red Line, where the tides were unpredictable. There were few merchants willing to take the risk to sail to our island with surprise. I grew up with food enough, though just barely. My village wasn't really self-sufficient, and it wasn't uncommon for the locals to join the bandits, in order to steal the next shipment and take all the food for their own. It was a very dog-eat-dog atmosphere. When I was 13, my father became gravely ill. We didn't have the money for a doctor, and he died soon after. My mother went into despair, and she all but forgot about me. I tried to join the bandits, feeling alone and unwanted, but they didn't accept me, saying I was weak and puny. The next day, Don Krieg showed up, stealing the food for him and his crew before the bandits could. When then attacked him in anger, they took him down single-handedly. I was amazed by his strength. I begged him to let me join his crew. Incredibly, he accepted. We sailed together, my loyalty never in question. He made me strong, gave me purpose when I was drifting. In my eyes, he could do no wrong. When we managed to escape the Grand Line, I acted as a decoy, luring the Marines away from our flagship, without a second thought. When I managed to escape, I found myself at the Baratie. The rest is history. Jin chuckled to himself. It's funny, I tried to join the bandits because they were strong, then joined Krieg when he proved stronger, only to join you when you were stronger still. You should probably be afraid of my betrayal in case I find someone even stronger, he said, his tone full of carefully hidden self-loathing. Luffy would have none of that. Please, as if anyone could be stronger than me. Even if there was, you wouldn't want to leave. Jin cocked his head in confusion. Luffy grinned like his namesake. I'm going to make sure you have so much fun on my crew that you'll never want to leave. Jin smiled slightly, but his eyes seemed clear of doubts for the first time since he'd gotten on the boat. Yosaku pounded his fist on the deck, getting the attention of Luffy, Jin, and Sanji within the kitchens. How can you act so carefree at a time like this? We're going off to Arlong Park. Do you have any idea how serious that is? Luffy shook his head no. But Jin seemed to Tao's side, and decided to enlighten Luffy. Okay. Listen really closely to me, Luffy. In the Grand Line, there are 3 major powers. One of them is the Shichibukai. They are 7 pirates approved by the world government. Sanji asked, through the open window of the kitchen, how any pirate could be approved by the government. Yosaku explained calmly, the Shichibukai used to be pirates with enormous bounties. Now, they hunt down other pirates, in exchange for amnesty for their actions. Hawkeyes, the man Big Bro Zoro faced, is one of them. One of the Shichibukai is a merman, a race with 10 times the strength of a man and the ability to breathe underwater. And Arlong, the man Nami is going after, was on his crew. Do you understand how powerful a foe we face now? Luffy looked up from his sketching pad, which he had retrieved from, I have no idea. So, he looks like this? Luffy questioned, revealing a poor drawing of a gaping fish on 2 legs. Jin, despite himself, chuckled, while Sanji laughed outright when he peeked through the kitchen door. Yosaku hung his head, sad that all his effort had been worthless. Luffy suddenly became serious. I don't care how strong he is. Nami wants something with him. If he gets in my way, I'll kick his ass. It's as simple as that. Jin raised an eyebrow. With Krieg, the man had carefully judged his opponents, learning all their weaknesses before he fought. Luffy, on the other hand, seemed prone to just charging right in. It was an oddly refreshing course of action. Yosaku brightened at Luffy's attitude, only for his mouth to yield to a waterfall of saliva as Sanji emerged, balancing plates of delicious-looking food. Okay, we've got meat off the bone, fried beans, and my specialty rice. Everyone dig in. The next 5 minutes were occupied by table manners that would have made wild animals look like high-class society. Luffy tore into everything in sight, becoming the human vacuum. Yosaku, having learned from experience, tried to eat his food as fast as possible before it disappeared down Luffy's gullet. Jin was simply too ignorant to prepare. Half his food disappeared without him even noticing. Sanji, after a punishing blow to Luffy's soft head, was left clear of the slaughter. Sanji started to stare off dreamily for some reason. If Nami-san is involved with these mermen, maybe she is a mermaid. Hearts replaced his one visible eye, causing Jin to take a cautious step away. Luffy, in response, held up a picture identical to his last one, except this one had long hair. Sanji exploded, yelling at Luffy as if it would solve all the world's problems. They were suddenly interrupted by a massive jet of water from the side of the boat. Turning to investigate, the four found themselves staring into the hungry eyes of what appeared to be a giant bull with fins and scales. Yosaku started panicking in a very Usopp-esque manner, while the other three watched with no obvious emotion. "Anyone else want to take it?" Luffy asked, still gnawing on the bone he'd just put in his mouth. Sanji slowly stood up, turning to face the sea cow. "Oi, if it's just the food you want, take it." The cow gave no sign of understanding, but did open its mouth and lean forward. Out of nowhere, Sanji gave it a punishing kick to the head. In response to Yosaku's panic, he explained, "The cow was going to eat me too. What kind of manners are those?" The cow reappeared, this time looking angry. Sanji stared it down calmly. As it dashed forward, Sanji leapt high into the air. Collier shoot. With that, Sanji delivered a powerful kick to the creature's neck, effectively bruising if not crumbling its windpipe. The sea cow fell on its back, creating a nice little dramatic water jet. Sanji turned to bow. Jin applauded very respectfully. Luffy took another approach. "Suge, I'm so glad I got you as my cook." Yosaku took a deep breath. "I'm going to die of a heart attack if I stick around big bro Luffy any longer than necessary," the man thought to himself. Sanji returned to his seat. Now that the excitement was over, he had a question to ask. "Oi, Luffy. The shitty old man mentioned something to me, and I've been meaning to ask you about it." Taking his eyes off Yosaku's temporarily unguarded plate, Luffy turned to face Sanji, indicating he had his attention. The old man came across a few people with that hacky stuff when he was in the Grand Line. He was wondering how you and everyone on your crew managed to use it, since it's supposed to be really rare. Luffy smiled, revealing his semi-full mouth. "That's easy. Hacky is just the excess energy given off by a strong spirit. Some people have a special hacky like me, but that's just because I have a special soul." Luffy then held up one finger. "One of the reasons why my Nakama can use it is because they knew about it in the first place." A second finger went up. "Another reason is that they spent a lot of time dealing with my hacky, so they got a better understanding of what it feels like." A third finger went up. "The main reason they can all use it, though, is because they all have crazy dreams they'd lay their lives down for. Usopp may be a coward, and Nami might not look like much." At this point, Sanji's foot headed for his head, accompanied by the chain smoker's enraged yell. "Like hell, Nami Swan isn't much. Do you even have eyes? Or does your rubber brain think boys are better?" Luffy took the blow, his head snapping back into place due to the wonders of a rubber neck. He kept on speaking, completely ignoring Sanji's outburst. "But deep down, they're just as determined as me or Zoro. Usopp has spent his entire life wanting to be brave, to be a warrior, and Nami is as fierce as a tiger. She'd sooner cut off her arm than just throw everything she believes in away. That is why, with a little help from me, they managed to learn how to use hacky. This isn't OC. Nami stabbed herself and was willing to spend another hopeless few years gathering money just so no one would get hurt. As to Usopp, hello, if he wasn't as insane as the rest of them, would he have fought Luffy with everything he had in Water 7? The Straw Hats aren't normal people, even the ones that look normal, so I would appreciate fewer comments about how you guys can't believe that the weaker characters have hacky as well. On with the story." At this point, the sea cow righted itself, now crying and with a big bump on his head. Luffy turned away from Sanji to the cow. "Hey, mystery cow. Would you mind helping us get to the next island?" The cow just stared, and started to just turn away and leave when Luffy spoke again, this time in the voice he used with Thrasher when he was still training him. "Are you sure you wouldn't like to help us?" Luffy asked, freaking out the rest of the people on the boat, who hadn't heard Luffy's no-nonsense voice before. The cow froze. He turned back to face Luffy, sufficiently cowed, no pun intended. Luffy grinned, and expertly lassoed a rope around the cow's horns and attached it to the boat. "Onward!" Luffy yelled, signaling the cow to haul fin, leaving Jin, Sanji, and Yosaku to go flying back amid a hail of three-quarters eaten food. Elsewhere, Zoro was officially pissed. "This is bad." Zoro got partially pissed when Usopp got loud and started panicking. He became moderately pissed when Nami started haggling him about money he didn't even remember borrowing from her, and he had been borderline pissed when Luffy had pulled the training regime from the land of melon waffles of doom. Waffles, covered in cheese syrup. Yum, WTF. But now, Zoro was officially pissed. The group had finally gotten to Arlong Park. where Nami had apparently charged off towards in hope of getting the substantial bounty. Zoro, even with a crippling injury, had been all for the warrior's approach. Of course, Usopp wouldn't know warrior's pride if it popped out of his bag and slapped him silly. So, pathetic coward that he was, had jumped Zoro when his back was turned, aided by Johnny, traitor. Now, Zoro was tied up with rope, surrounded by mermen. Usopp had steered clear of Omp's ship at the first sign of the fish people, leaving Zoro behind. Oh yeah, he was definitely going to kill him, but those happy thoughts would have to be put on hold. Right now, Zoro had to deal with the situation. Here's the sitrep. He was tied up with quality rope, with a fresh injury that had been patchily treated by him, which even then was sending constant waves of pain and fever, breaking his concentration. He had only one workable sword. He was surrounded by mermen in their home base. Said mermen seemed to be made of tougher stuff than humans, as Zoro's flares of hacky had only taken out the obvious weaklings, and each flare was met by a kick to the chest by the nearest merman. So, yeah, if he ever got out of this, Usopp would be his new training dummy. In front of the green-haired man, the leader of the mermen sat on a throne-like chair, made of simple stone. He wore an open beach shirt over his impressive chest, which had a tattoo of the sun over the left pectoral. He was also wearing green shorts with a blue belt of cloth, a fur cap over black hair, and sandals. That's where the human qualities ended. He was easily 7 feet, perhaps taller. His skin was a light blue, with webbing between his fingers. Though he was a shark merman, he apparently had some swordfish somewhere in the gene pool, since his nose was longer than Usopp's, and very pointy. Oh, and his teeth. Very, very pointy. The leader was regarding him with the look Zoro had come to associate with all the enemy's fate lined up for him. Arrogant, full of superiority, and believing that they were invincible. Seriously, the crew should make a checklist to test the theory. The fishman spoke, his tone deep and interwoven with his god complex. I'll ask you again. What were you doing on a boat near my shore? Are you some nobody bounty hunter looking to take on me, Sawtooth Arlong? Not that you'd have a chance, you're just a human. Oh, that was another quirk about the guy, Arlong apparently. He seemed to think mermen were inherently better than humans. Zoro didn't bother to point out that mermen couldn't eat devil's fruits, or the fact that humans outnumbered them about 10 to 1. I told you, my captain sent me here to find a woman. Do you need to have your hearing checked, fishman? That caused dark murmurs to fly. Arlong grinned maliciously. I'll pretend you didn't say that, human. You should remember who you're talking to. Mermen have the ability to breathe underwater, while you humans are chained to the land. Fate has ordained that we are superior, while your race is meant to be below us. If you sass me, that would be defying fate, wouldn't it? Zoro raised an eyebrow. This guy needed a reality check. Zoro decided to try out a new idea, one he'd gotten from Luffy. Zoro spoke, and when he did, the air seemed to drop a few dozen degrees, while a killing intent that rivaled Arlong's own when he became angered permeated the air. Do I look like I care about fate? Okay, so it needed to be perfected, but it carried the point. Zoro's piercing stare into Arlong's impassive eyes was broken by another kick by another random fishman. Arlong scoffed. You think that just because you've got that little parlor trick called hacky that you're better than me? We mermen are above such immaterial things. You do better to learn your place. Humans exist on a lower level than me and my kind. Get it through your head. Zoro coughed up a little blood, but otherwise seemed uncaring for his situation. He'd been strong before Luffy had taught him hacky. He wasn't powerless without it. He just had to wait for the opportune moment. A door behind Arlong opened, and a person walked out. A human, more specifically a woman. A short, red-headed woman. Zoro's eyes widened in surprise, though that soon passed. He'd never really trusted her, after all. Nami regarded him with contempt, as she continued walking toward Arlong. You know I hate it when you go off on the human thing, Arlong. Arlong grinned, surveying Nami as if she were some fabulous prize in his possession. You know that you're the exception to that rule, Nami. No one else on my crew is able to draw maps as detailed or as accurately as you can. Nami scoffed, still walking forward, in slightly different attire than Zoro had seen her wearing before. Of course none of your crew can. Our very brain compositions are different. Nami crouched down in front of the now scowling Zoro, her face in a contemptuous smirk, which oddly didn't seem right. What is it? Can't understand the situation through that thick skull of yours. Nami showed her left shoulder, which had always been covered by her shirt sleeve when she'd been on the crew. Makes sense now? She asked, as Zoro stared at the tattoo on her shoulder. It was an artistic representation of a swordfish, identical to the one on the pirate flag that hung at the top of Arlong Park. Zoro merely stared into her eyes. I'm not surprised. I never trusted you in the first place. Nami scowled, but once again it didn't seem natural. To Zoro, it appeared as if Nami was wearing a kind of mask, hiding her true emotions behind a wall of contempt and disregard. Then why did you come? The woman asked, as she stood up once more. Luffy told me to. He's the captain, after all. You know, he never stopped trusting you, even when you stole the ship. Where's Thrasher, by the way? Nami paused for a moment, and the mask seemed to waver, but it solidified once again. That retard sea snake. He's with Arlong's animal trainer, right now. And as to Luffy, he's an even bigger retard than his pet. I said from the start that I was only with you for the money. Arlong laughed boisterously at that statement, slamming his hand down on the arm of his chair. This woman, she's a real witch, isn't she? She abandoned her people, even ignored her mother's death, all for the sake of money. Sha ha 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 ha. Nami's breath caught, and her mask completely disappeared, revealing to Zoro shame, self-loathing, and an incredible sorrow. Zoro raised an eyebrow, while Nami recomposed herself. The woman looked down on him once more. You see? I was never a part of your crew. Now, why don't you just go back to your retard captain, tell him to get a new pet, and go off to the Grand Line or whatever. Zoro chuckled to himself, drawing confusion. He looked straight into Nami's eyes. His grayish-white eyes making her feel very small and insignificant. Are you sure about that first part? With that, Zoro threw himself backward. He fell into the water and sank like a stone, disappearing from view. A few minutes passed. Arlong's crew started remarking on what just happened, some laughing at the man's idiocy in killing himself. Nami heard none of it, her eyes locked on the bubbles that slowly dwindled off. Conscious thought left. The only thing in her head was, Baka, as she dived into the water, intent on saving the drowning swordsman. Minutes later, Nami hauled him up, gasping for air and from physical exertion, unaware from the distrusting look she was getting from one of Arlong's lieutenants, Karubi. Nami yelled at Zoro in frustration. Baka, what the hell were you thinking? She cried, and all of a sudden she was back on the Going Merry, yelling at Zoro over some random incident. Usopp yelling at them to calm down. Luffy laughing without a care in the world in the background. Nami tried to clear those thoughts from her head. She really didn't want to remember those times. Zoro smirked, before looking at her with a knowing gaze. You can't even watch a single person die in front of you. Some witch. Nami was seized by an unholy anger. Just when things were working out, when 10 long years were starting to pay off, Luffy and his stupid crew had to come and ruin everything. Urusai, she screamed, delivering a hockey-powered bitch slap, knocking Zoro a few inches off the ground. Arlong whistled in admiration. You gotten strong, Nami. Maybe these idiots managed to teach you something. Nami, her face set in stone, merely turned away. Lock him up, he's not important. As she passed Arlong, SL's still on. Only 7 million to go. Arlong nodded with an acquiescing air, as he signaled for 2 of his lackeys to throw the moss head in the prison. All this excitement has gotten me worked up. I think I'll go run some errands. With that, Arlong stood up, making to leave for Nami's hometown, Kokoyashi village. As the major players of Arlong's crew followed as an escort, Nami snuck into a certain room. Zoro waited in the cell, contemplating escape. Not really likely, given the circumstances. The door opened, and Nami stood in the doorway. Zoro regarded her levelly, noting the knife in her hand. She came forward, and brought the knife down. She turned to leave, talking over her shoulder when she'd paused in the doorway. Get out of here, she said, before leaving the prison, following after Arlong's entourage. In the cell, the newly liberated Zoro rubbed his arms to get the blood flowing. He surveyed the neatly cut ropes. He smirked to himself. Seems that Nami isn't as heartless as she's supposed to be. With that, Zoro decided to kill time by taking out the fishmen in the base. He grinned demonically, as he slowly removed Wado Ichimonji from its sheath. Usopp's eyes fluttered open. Where was he? He remembered abandoning Zoro, swimming to shore, finding an upside-down town, being attacked by a little kid, Usopp remembered. He'd made to protect a little boy and a young woman with blue hair and tattoos across her upper body from a merman, and then everything went black. He looked around panicky, fearing that he was in the merman's custody. Instead, he found he was in a simple cottage, with the boy and woman from before sitting down to the kitchen table for tea. The woman regarded him, an odd combination of relief and exasperation on her face. Oh, you're up. Be grateful you're here. If I hadn't knocked you out, you'd be dead. Usopp angered a bit at that. Oi, why the heck did you do that? Usopp regressed slightly with his next statement. I'm the great Captain Usopp. I'm more than enough for one measly merman. The woman regarded him coldly, while the boy seemed to glare at him, as if Usopp were mocking him. The woman spoke, with the air of one speaking to a child. You're an idiot. No one can stand up to Arlong and his mermen. You saw Gosa village coming in, didn't you? Arlong pulled that off single-handedly. That merman would have slaughtered you. While Usopp suddenly started exhibiting symptoms of, holy shat, I almost got killed Osis and, I must not stay on this island or I'll die itis. The blue-haired woman turned to the kid. You're from Gosa, aren't you? What were you doing there? The boy looked down. Arlong killed my father when he attacked our village. I can't just let that slide, so, I went off to Arlong Park to take revenge. But this witch stopped me. I went to Gosa after that, to take on the underlings. Usopp raised an eyebrow. This kid had more courage than he did. That wasn't saying much, but still. The woman had a different opinion. You're an idiot and a coward. That was your plan. To throw your life away needlessly? Your life has been saved twice now, by both me and the witch. Usopp was appalled at her callousness, and asked why she was going so hard on the kid. Life's harsh. Those who can't accept that are better off dead. She regarded the silently crying boy, and her gaze softened. Your mother must be worried sick. Go and take care of her. The boy's eyes widened. In his childish rage, he'd forgotten all about his mom. He got up, thanked her for the tea, and left. Usopp watched him go, realizing the whole thing had been a ploy to keep the kid from killing himself. He turned to the woman. You know, you're actually pretty nice. Even if you have tattoos. The only girl near Usopp's age that he'd met had been Kaya, and so he came from an old school of thought when it came to women. She scoffed. That's a stereotype. Anyway, my name's Negico. Care to explain why you're on an island under the rule of a tyrant? Usopp bit back the reflexive. I'm an awesome, benevolent captain, tirade. He could lie for fun and with strangers, but Usopp had respect for Luffy, as long as the idiot wasn't trying to kill him. He quickly laid out who he was, what the crew was doing, and the pursuit for Nami. Negico raised an eyebrow but nodded sadly. I see. So you're the one she was talking about. At Usopp's confused expression, she elaborated. That witch the kid was talking about was Nami. She's been working for Arlong for nigh on a decade. She betrayed her hometown and her family, all for the sake of money. Usopp's eyes widened in shock. I'm sorry about this, but Nami was never a part of your crew. She went with you for the loot. This is the house she grew up in, but she left it for Arlong's side. My little sister isn't who you think she is. Usopp exploded. That witch, we never suspected. She played us all for fools. How could she do something like that? Usopp dwindled down when the last statement registered. Little sister? You mean, you're related to her? Negico sighed, before standing up and moving to pick up an old photo. It showed a toddler Nami and Negico, crowding around a red-haired woman. We're not related by blood, but we might as well be. We were raised together, orphans, by the same woman. She was our mother. Then, Arlong killed her. Usopp gaped in shock. This seemed to just add to the atrocities Nami had committed. Before Usopp could go off again, he heard a commotion in the distance. Negico heard it too. Come. Let's see what's going on. The two exited the cottage, which was surrounded by a tangerine orchard, and jogged the short distance to nearby Kokoyashi village, Usopp following Negico. They came upon the buildings soon and hid in an alleyway. Usopp nearly went into apoplexy at the scene before him. A massive beast of a creature with unnatural skin and a shark's fin was holding a heavily scarred man by the throat. Other such fish-like creatures watching. TT, that's Arlong. He's huge. Negico paid him no mind, watching attentively. In a very long, drawn-out way, Arlong proceeded to impress the reality of his rule and make a hypocrite of himself. He told the man in his arms, the unofficial leader of Kokoyashi by the name of Genzo, that the possession of weapons caused only chaos and death, as if he didn't cause enough of that himself, and that those who defied his rule had to die. Had he not destroyed Gosa for just that reason? Usopp stiffened. He turned that whole village upside down for just one person? Negico nodded grimly. Since the start of his reign, Arlong has forced us to buy our own lives once a month. The amount is exorbitant for simple traders like us. If even one person falls behind on the tribute, that person and everyone in their village gets slaughtered. The sight of the man that was like her father having the life crushed out of him proved too much for the woman. She stepped out of her hiding place to confront Arlong. Arlong, why do you have to kill him? Have we not loyally paid the tribute all these years? Arlong turned his gaze onto her, but the pride of Belmir ran as deep in Negico as it did in Nami. She stood her ground. The other villagers emerged, showing their own agreement with Negico. Genzo seemed terrified, but not for himself. You fools! We've worked too long for you to throw it all away. When Arlong arrived, we swore to fight a battle of attrition. For 10 long years we succeeded. Don't waste it on my death. It was soon obvious that his words had come too late. Arlong had a malicious glint in his eyes, staring at the mob like a shark surveying a school of fish. Genzo closed his eyes in defeat. The WTF factor just generated is equivalent to the one produced when Arlong's head was covered in an explosion. A loud, melodramatic voice filled with cowardice to the fourth power spoke from a nearby roof. The people in Kokoyashi watched in mixed awe and fear as the trembling Usopp made his quasi-heroic speech. Stop right there, you overgrown fish. I, the great Captain Usopp, with his 8,000 followers, will stop at island from your tyranny. Leave of your own accord, and I promise to go easy on you. The smoke cleared, to reveal an unscathed Arlong. The merman tossed Genzo aside, before turning his attention to Usopp. Said Long Nose nearly had a heart attack. The shark man was giving him a look of such hatred, malice, and bloodlust that he made Zoro look like a fluffy bunny. 8,000 you say? I'll take them all on, starting with you. In a flash, Arlong was flying at Usopp. He barely managed to jump out of the way, and just in time. The entire house Usopp had been standing on crumbled from the force of the impact. Usopp stood still, and the whole world seemed to hold its breath. He turned from the horde of mermen, to the upright Arlong, to the ruins of the building. His face remained neutral and calm as he stared off into the distance. Then, he turned and ran like a bat out of hell. Arlong's crew quickly restrained the man, knowing that when their captain got angry, fragile objects such as buildings tended to break. A contingent of mermen chased after Usopp, who was crying theatrically and screaming his head off as he outraced his own sonic boom. The populace of Kokoyashi village stared in shock at the selfless sacrifice of Usopp in distracting the mermen. This was the scene Nami found as she arrived at her hometown. Zoro was at peace. There is nothing more relaxing than a good, heartless massacre. From his lofty perch, the author nearly had a stroke. I didn't write that, I whispered fearfully. So, you really think I care about the fourth dimension? Zoro asked the heavens. My eyes widened in fear, before a sadistic grin marred my face, causing my sister on the laptop beside me to cautiously edge away. So, that's the way you want to play it, Marimo? To quote Fuyutaro-san. Don't fuck with the master. Zoro raised an eyebrow. Bring it, he challenged, not fearing the omni-powerful creator of his universe. I rolled up my sleeves, cracked my knuckles, and set my fingers to the keys like a pianist at Carnegie Hall. Giant space monkey. Zoro jumped out of his spot on Arlong's throne, narrowly avoiding the ginormous, green chimpanzee in a tin-foil suit that crashed. Zoro, unfortunately, slid on the blood of the merman he had so casually murdered. Donalgram said let there be a brick wall, and there was. Zoro reached for his sword to slice it, only for Kuina's treasured blade to turn into orchids. Zoro hit the wall, stared at the bouquet in his hands, before glaring at the sky. You're dead, he yelled, but it was futile. Taj Mahal, the tribute of Shah Jahan to his favorite wife, appeared from nowhere above Zoro's head, before being claimed by gravity, crushing Arlong Park, the poor monkey, and the arrogant Marimo, and there was much rejoicing. I turned to face my online audience. Sorry about that, folks. Let's get on with the FIC as it was properly meant. Zoro surveyed the corpses and nearly dead that once was Arlong's crew. Man, you guys barely made me break a sweat. For being all above humans in every way, you sure didn't pose much of a fight. Zoro measured his own reserves. This injury's a pain, but that was surprisingly easy. Zoro was secretly pleased. If he was being honest with himself, he had become a bit spoiled on hacky. That's it, an extra representative of everything in my routine for forming a crutch. A plan to improve his training aside, Zoro was getting bored very quickly after his little fun. Lo and behold, a break in the monotony presented itself. Let it not be said that Donalgram does not grant what his subjects request over a grudge against a previous incarnation, as if anyone would actually say that, but still. A loud, boisterous voice rose over the wall blocking the harbor, drawing Zoro's attention. At the same time, 3 separate fishing poles appeared. Oh, this one is strong. They have surely caught the greatest fish in all of East Blue. With that said, one of the poles pulled up a pair of shorts. Oh, it was me. Indeed, I am the greatest in all of East Blue. Intrigued by the odd voice, Zoro walked over and peered over the wall. He found one of the more interesting mermen he'd ever seen. The guy's skin was a dark pink or salmon if you prefer. He had 6 arms, each of them with suckers, though they seemed visceral. He wore a tight shirt and shorts in the prison stripe style, except with yellow to replace the white. His mouth seemed to jut out of his face, like evolution had intended to put a tentacle there and had changed its mind halfway. The tattoo of the sun present on all the mermen, for reasons unknown to Zoro, was on his forehead. Perhaps the oddest part of his appearance was the half-dozen spikes of white hair that made his head resemble a sea urchin, if vaguely. The man took notice of Zoro. Oh, who are you? Are you a guest of Arlong-sama? Zoro looked from the octopus man to the abattoir that once was the Arlong Park courtyard. Zoro said he was a guest. The octopus man smiled, as if this were the best news. Great, what's your name? You want mine? It's Hatchin. I'm an octopus merman. Aren't I awesome? So saying, Hatchin started wiggling all 6 of his arms in a disturbing manner. Zoro thought to himself, what a strange guy. Hatchin halted his dancing. If you're looking for Arlong-sama, he went to Kokoyashi village. Want me to take you there? Zoro saw no problem with this. Hopping into the large pot floating nearby, Hatchin took hold and started his ferry service. Just as Zoro and Hatchin disappeared from sight, Arlong entered the courtyard. The bloodbath might have been a calming sight to Zoro, but to Arlong it was straight out of a nightmare. Through bloodied lips, the merman that Arlong questioned revealed that the human they had captured was, in fact, the infamous pirate hunter Zoro. Arlong froze. Even he had come to, if not fear, then become cautious of the extraordinary swordsman. To discover that the man ordered to retrieve Nami was Zoro. Well, that cast everything in a new light. The captain of the crew went from the reported idiot to a mysterious, powerful figure. The Sea King currently being conditioned by Kajiki wasn't retarded and brainwashed but the genuine article of Sea King. Karubi, though horrified, had a look of smugness about him. Arlong-sama, I know that she is very useful, but Nami is a traitor. There's no way Zoro could have escaped without help. Arlong's eyes darkened, knowing full well that such an act would be well within Nami's ability and conscience. A gasp from behind drew his attention. He found a gaping Chu, with the battered form of the human that had shot at him. Arlong grinned evilly. The human would provide the answers. This proved false, because Usopp proved extremely unhelpful. The man answered their questions with obvious lies. Under the threat of violence, i.e. the removal of his nose, the coward only started lying even more, following the twisted logic that stated that killing him would mean Zoro would definitely not return. Arlong was getting annoyed. He wanted vengeance, and this human wasn't helping. Hachin, who had reappeared halfway through, revealed he had just dropped Zoro off at Kokoyashi, looking for Arlong. Usopp's blood turned to ice. Any bad squeak of a hope he'd had was destroyed by Zoro. Karma, who would have figured? Karubi once again tried to press the Nami traitor theory, only to be interrupted by the woman herself. Like a wrathful goddess, she stalked towards the crew, her hacky unconsciously leaking, if not fully intimidating the mermen then at least alerting them to her anger. You insult me, Karubi, she said, walking towards Usopp, whose final hopes that Nami was just faking withered and died. There was no sign of deception as she regarded Usopp with contempt. I've been with you for 10 years, loyally, and yet you question me at every opportunity. If I were going to just betray you, I would have long ago. Internally, Nami was both irked and worried. Zoro, you idiot. Look at the mess you made. Usopp, however, remained unaware of Nami's inner thoughts, his escape and survival the only thing on his mind. While he snuck something from his bag to his hand. Hisatsu. Kemari Boshi. Usopp yelled, detonating the smoke pellet. Like a bullet from a gun, Usopp made a break for the water. For a moment, he allowed himself to hope. Then, Nami appeared in front of him. As the smoke cleared, the skeptics of Arlong's crew were proved wrong. Nami had a dagger in her hand, plunged into the coward. I'll do anything, for my dream, she whispered, a sick desperation in her eyes and voice. Usopp stared at the blood on his hands. Nami removed the dagger. Usopp stumbled forward a few steps in shock, before collapsing into the water. As the crew congratulated Nami and Karubi was forced to apologize, a horrified Johnny watched from a tree. He jumped down and ran for Zoro, with news of the depth of Nami's treachery. Zoro was berating himself. While I was killing time, Usopp was risking his life. Damn it, how can I be this pathetic? Zoro continued with his mad sprint for Arlong Park, when he became aware of an odd sound. It was like thunder, if thunder resembled the sound of breaking wood. Zoro turned to his left, a sneaking suspicion confirmed. Z-O-O-R-R-R-R-O-O-O-O-O-O-O-O. Luffy screamed, waving from a ship that was, defying all laws of sanity, sailing across the ground. Yosaku, the curly eyebrow cook, and the sickly-looking guy from Baradi were clinging to the boat for dear life. Just before the ship hit Zoro, one thought ran through his mind. The instant he turns his back, I am going to shove my sword right up his ass. Then, the wonders of momentum and inertia took hold, dragging Zoro for the ride, before the boat impacted with a thick clump of trees. The world was nothing but chaos and pain. Slowly, leaking hacky and killing intent like a punctured tire. Zoro stood up among the wreckage. Luffy seemed right as rain, the cook straightening his tie beside him. Jin and Yosaku were still stuck to the ground. Yosaku wasn't a monster. And Jin simply wasn't as accustomed to raw craziness as Sanji was due to his years on the Barati. Zoro, what are you doing here? I told you to get Nami. The Straw Hat bastard had the audacity to talk down to him. Zoro dashed forward to slice the rubber man, only to have his blade blocked by a foot. Zoro turned his glare to Sanji, who merely shrugged. Luffy paid no heed to the attempt on his life, looking around with a look of childlike confusion. Where's Usopp? The boy asked, breaking Zoro out of his trance. He's dead, Johnny yelled, drawing the attention of the upright powerhouses, including Jin and Yosaku who just stood up. His statement caused all of them to freeze. Big Sis killed him. She's a witch. I've heard such terrible things, and they're all true. She betrayed us all, even her own people, for money. She works at Arlong's right hand. She even killed Usopp-kun. Johnny reached them, cheeks running down his cheeks. Zoro carefully concealed his feelings. Yosaku joined Johnny in crying. Jin was unreadable, and Sanji refused to even accept the possibility that Nami was evil. Luffy, on the other hand. A wave of hacky on a scale beyond anything they'd ever felt tore through the air. The trees were assailed by an invisible wind as everyone unfortunate to be within 50 yards felt as if they were being held in the fist of a deity beyond the scope of their understanding. A feeling of insignificance, of standing up against, taunting, a being of infinite strength and power, of being crushed under the relentless, calculating gaze of death itself, washed over everything. "Liar!" yelled Luffy, who was not Luffy. Luffy was a lovable idiot, who ate a lot and got impressed by the stupidest things. The creature in their midst wasn't human. No human could harness such power. Johnny and Yosaku, and to lesser extents Jin, Sanji, and Zoro, knew in their lizard brain that cared only for survival, that the only reason they weren't obliterated was because this monster willed their survival. Johnny was blasted away by an invisible force, thrown through the air with the force of a cannonball. The thing that caused Yosaku to soil his pants, with most of the crew right behind them, was the knowledge that not Luffy had used no more energy than he would to flick a fly away. The mountain of spiritual weight disappeared. Yosaku, freed from the crushing presence of Luffy's hacky, fainted. Jin vomited, Sanji frantically grabbed for a cig, seeking refuge in nicotine, and Zoro broke out into a cold sweat. Luffy's face could have been carved from ice. He stretched out his hand, grabbing Johnny and dragging him over. The man was utterly destroyed. His sunglasses had atomized, his body had several odd lumps that simply weren't right, and his pants were stained with the discharge of his bowls. By some miracle, he was still breathing. Luffy regarded the man with stony eyes, which hid a seething anger. "I would never have used my power like that unless you hadn't said such lies. Nami would never kill Usopp. Nami's eyes smiled when she was with us. She wasn't faking anything, we're Nakama. Nakama don't kill each other." As he ranted at Johnny's broken form, Zoro was taking the deepest breaths of his life to calm his racing heart, while Jin continued to cough up bile and Sanji dragged like his life depended on it. The king's disposition? Sure, if you mean king of the freaking universe. How the fucks can Luffy, innocent, stupid Luffy, have this power? In that moment, any doubts Zoro had to Luffy's dream of being Pirate King were decimated. Someone with so much power who settled on such a trivial thing deserved nothing less. Luffy paused in his tirade at Johnny's unconscious body. He turned around. Nami was there, right up the road, staring at him with pure fear. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks, her pupils contracted to pinpricks. She noticed Luffy's stare, and shivered. "IID didn't KKK kill him, Luffy. I was acting." Nami stuttered out, she was terrified. The sheer power Luffy had just exhibited had destroyed all her perceptions of him. She had never truly understood Luffy until that moment. To live with that incredible energy every day, she couldn't imagine it. Before then, Nami had seen hacky as a tool. Now, after seeing its true face in Luffy, she saw it as a curse. There was a reason so few could harness hacky, and even fewer the Hawashoku. If everyone could use it, the world would be torn apart. Luffy had to restrain himself every second of the day, hide behind a mask of naivety and stupidity, so that he didn't accidentally do to those around him what he'd just done to Johnny. He had taught them how to play with fire, but he'd let them see what happens when you weren't careful on their own. Nami felt something shift inside her. Luffy had been touched by this power since he was a child, and yet here he was. He hadn't gone off to conquer the world, as he could do, she had no doubt. Instead, he'd stuck to his childhood dream, and concerned himself with nothing more than making friends and having fun. He believed in his Nakama so strongly, he would unleash the monster within to refute any claims against them. The fact that Luffy had just done what he'd done to Johnny, just because he'd listed all the evils she'd been forced to do, stunned her. She was filled in equal parts fear, awe, and some feeling she could not name. It was like discovering the person she married was a god. She was amazed, but utterly terrified of what he could do to those that tried to hurt them. When Luffy had looked into her eyes, everything she had worked for the last 10 years paled into significance. All that mattered was comforting him, assuring him that everything he'd done for her wasn't in vain, that he wasn't an irredeemable villain for protecting her. At the same time, her survival instincts screamed at her she was being foolish, that this demon in human skin was dangerous and she should be running very far very fast in the other direction. The conflict left her weak at the knees. When Luffy nodded, as if what she'd just said was the obvious truth, a dam behind her broke. She found herself telling him about everything to her. Belmere, saving Kokoyashi, everything. She showed him her bandaged hand, where she'd stabbed Usopp, to confirm his survival. She couldn't say why she did it. It could have been to prove she hadn't betrayed him, or it could have been to calm him down so he didn't destroy her. Her sudden, inexplicable sense of debt to him warred with her lizard brain as her life story tumbled past her lips. When she finished, Luffy continued to stare at her. Just as she started to feel like she was drowning in the warm, bottomless depths of his eyes, she was saved by the pervert. Nami Swan is so beautiful and awesome for doing such selfless things. Sanji screamed for the world to hear, his legs wiggling and a giant heart replacing his visible eye. Zoro remained neutral, still not ready to trust her, while Jin seemed genuinely impressed by the burden she'd borne all these years. Yosaku, like his partner, was still out of commission. At that moment, Usopp appeared, shouting, "Guys! She didn't kill me. He stopped when he saw Nami there. Luffy turned to face his marksman, and suddenly his smile was there. Like the sun, all their worries and fears seemed to evaporate in the light of Luffy's carefree smile. It was all the more striking to the crew, since they now knew of the darkness that lurked behind that grin. Usopp, Nami's still our nakama, isn't that great? The haze that seemed to surround the scene, after all the incredible circumstances that led up to it, was broken by the appearance of Nami's sister. She seemed surprised to see Nami with her crew, her nakama, but she continued to hail her regardless. This was urgent. Nami, the Marines are here, but they're not going to Arlong Park, they're headed towards the orchard. Nami froze as the puzzle solved itself in her head. With Arlong suddenly on the wayside in her thoughts, she realized what an idiot she'd been. Arlong would never let her go, and she already knew he bribed the Marines. He had sent the Marines to steal her money. It rang true so thoroughly that it was the only explanation. She turned to face her nakama, feeling at home with Luffy's grin, Zoro's bored expression, Usopp's obvious fear, even Sanji's hard eyes and Jin's quiet expression. These were her friends, and they would help her with anything. Nami asked them, feel like kicking some Marine butt? She needn't have asked. Even Usopp was agreeing in his own way. Nami turned and ran for her treasure, her nakama behind her. Zoro and Luffy unhindered by the fact they were carrying Johnny and Yosaku. Apart from a brief stop at the doctor's where they dropped off the bounty hunting pair, the Straw Hat crew, now reunited, did not pause as they made for Belmir's orchard. When they arrived, they found Genzo watching incredulously as the Marines tore apart the orchard looking for Nami's treasure, overseen by the rat-leg, both figuratively and literally. Captain Nezumi. Said corrupt bastard was yelling at his men, come on, find it, it's 100 million after all. That was the last thing he said to his crew, as Nami smashed her staff into the back of his head. She was still a bit shaken up by Luffy's display, so she restrained her hacky. All the same, the man collapsed. In the time it took Nami to fell one, the Monster 3 aka Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji had taken down 10 apiece. Jin joined the fun too, tackling the fringes while Usopp, his cowardice temporarily forgotten in battle fever, picked off those who were running away. In the space of a minute, the entirety of the 16th branch was out cold. Genzo watched in shock. Nami, who are these people? He asked, amazed by the show of strength. Nami grinned, wider than she had in years, before saying, my nakama, with pride. The redhead then turned, making her way for Kokoyashi. Her crew, as well as Genzo and Nijiko, followed behind her. She reached the town square, before raising her voice to call her people to arms. Everyone, for these past 10 years, I've never betrayed you. I made a deal with Arlong to buy this village and free us all, but he has just tried to sabotage it. He sent his marine puppets to steal the money I have saved for you this long, hard decade. We can't let him get away with this. The villagers were stunned. They hadn't seen such fire in Nami since Belmir died. Suddenly, a calm, peaceful grin enveloped Nami's face. People of Kokoyashi, will you come die with me? She asked. They knew what she was asking. An attack on Arlong, to finally exact revenge. It was suicidal. Of course, was the unanimous cry. Nami grinned as her people gathered what weapons they could. She turned to face the road to Arlong Park, her people behind her, her nakama standing beside her. On an impulse, she gripped Luffy's hand with her own. The captain raised an eyebrow, and Sanji started crying, but no one else reacted. Holding her staff in the air, she yelled, charge. They moved forward, an unstoppable tide, a timeless symbol of the oppressed rebelling. They slowed only when they reached the gates. The crowd from Kokoyashi agreed to hang back, as the Straw Hat crew prepared for their toughest fight yet. Luffy cracked his knuckles, Nami twirled her staff, Zoro gripped his 2 new blades, borrowed off Johnny and Yosaku. Sanji stretched his legs, Jin twirled his tonfa, and Usopp, albeit nervously, put on his goggles. Finally, they were ready. Allow me, Luffy said, before stepping forward. He faced the foot-thick steel gates, before pulling back his right fist. His hacky a visible outline, the future Pirate King threw the punch. The gates exploded, crumbling even as they were blown off their hinges. Luffy regarded the sea of recovered mermen in front of him. Which one's Arlong?